Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. What's up, Bob Johnson? Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Let me get situated here. Time for a new way around. What up, blood? I'm assuming you can hear me. Everyone. Hello. Okay. I felt kind of nobody's answering. I don't know what's going on. All right, let's hit chapter 9. Justin, I I believe you would No, I'm not. I'm not muted, I promise. Let's see. It's a Daniel Defense M4A2 A1. It's there on purpose. No gay jellyfish lamps. Just man stuff. Just my hobbies. All right, let's get into this, and then we can make fun of people. Um, the Anne Frank of Tennessee. I mean Kentucky, and especially him saying that on Holocaust Remembrance Day was especially troublesome to me. Let's see. Hey, Hefe, do you want me to schedule a post his stream, or is she streaming? Just let me know. Well, and then comparing himself to a lynching victim. I haven't seen it all, but Hefe told me. Bob, I don't have any mannequins. I don't play dress up. Um, have a I have a lot of Fort Polk stuff since I was there for almost 5 years, but I was mostly where's my raspberry beret? Um, hang on. Right here. I will never put it on, but right here, properly folded. Doesn't have my unit insignia in it on the flash, but you know what? Not the tan Ranger berets. Oh, what is? What do you want to see full screen? You want full frontal, Mrs. Metcalf? Is that what you want? No, I'm not putting this on. I'll show you. So my my kids want me to keep all this stuff. So well, Cap, I mean, technically women wore black berets first, then mechanics, then I think Cav, and then oh yeah, Misfits shirt. And then the Rangers got them in the 70s, I think. It's buried history. So I was angry when that first came out, though. Extremely angry. In '01, Joey, I was a staff sergeant by then. Where was I? According to Quinn in '01, September 9th, '01, I was playing golf. September 10th, '01, I was really busy doing other things. Dang straight with my Ranger roll, Jeff. Joey, I had a guy. This was in the '90s. He was a 13-year E4, so he got forced out. But he said he would never become an NCO. The pile of black, 422 round magazine. It's clear. P320 suppressed. He had been off and on from 2-year-old E4. Wait, oh, that was in the Guard, though. Joey, good thing I'm not monetized, right? I figured I could do this until I am. Not a 22 like Todd. No, these are hit hards. Yeah, the Guard has some old ass E4s in it. Never go full Wally. I don't know. I may be more Wally than Wally. I'm not sure. shout out to Half Generals and him. What's up, Lucy? All right. I'm glad for the levity at the beginning. We know how this book has been going. So, chapter 9, Vulnerable. I saw battle corpses, myriad of them, and the white skeletons of young men. I saw them. I saw the debris of all dead soldiers, but I saw they were not, as was thought. They themselves were fully at rest. They suffered not. The living remained and suffered. The mother suffered, and the wife, and the child, and the musing comrade suffered. And the armies that remained suffered. Walt Whitman, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed. Couple of hours into our conversation, Stacy Pearsall mentioned in passing that during her second combat tour in Iraq, three of her friends had been killed in the explosion and the collapse of a house that had been rigged with hidden bombs that detonated when the soldiers entered. It was part of a story about why, as a military photographer, she had started making a portrait of each soldier she accompanied on patrol. In case they didn't come home, she explained. At that point, she had lost many friends who were killed in combat as her and herself deeply wounded. You don't know how long they're going to be around, she added, speaking of the living. Got to turn that on. Medically retired now as an Air Force staff sergeant, Stacy was nursing a dark beer, her black boots hooked around a bar stool, absent-mindedly toying with the folded handkerchief I'd given her earlier when she came to a difficult part of her story and had mopped up drenching tears. The bomb rigged house incident was a small patch of tapestry of death, loss, heartache, and physical and emotional pain that it has dominated her life for a dozen years and more. When I asked her when she saw the faces of the soldiers she photographed, she said one word: vulnerability. When someone says American soldier or combat soldier, people think of brawn, strength, invincibility, and immortality. But what I saw in front of me was a bunch of kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. Some of them hadn't drunk alcohol in their lives or felt the touch of a woman, or maybe never heard gunfire. Now they are thrust in this foreign country with all these expectations, maybe expectations they put on themselves, unrealistic sometimes, that they'll perform heroically when the first rounds go down range. I wanted people to see the reality, the vulnerability. That's what makes them human beings. Stacy was 35 when we spoke, 8 years after her final exposure to a string of IED blasts that left her with traumatic brain injury, a diagnosis of PTSD, cervical spine trauma, a faulty memory, near constant pain, night terrors, and occasional seizures. She wears her dark brown hair chopped and tied back in a ponytail, with and her large brown eyes and tight smile said to me, stubborn, tough, and vulnerable. Seems like somebody we covered never understands the complexity of battlefield injuries, battlefield trauma, um, and vulnerability when you've been exposed to those things. She was born into a family with a military tradition dating to the Revolutionary War. Her parents divorced when Stacy was an infant, and she and her mother bounced around a lot. She got remarried and moved, and then that marriage dissolved, and we moved again. Those leadership failures, Jeff, get you every time. Blow you up and blow a captain in half. She enlisted in the Air Force at 17, signing up as a photographer. In the military, the job title combat camera designates both the tool and the person. You could be an infantryman, a naval, petty officer, a C 130 pilot, or a combat camera. Stacy was a combat camera. The job is to document raids, assaults, firefights, ID ambushes, the wounded, and the dead for analysis within the military. Although some images are selected for public viewing, it's a demanding and dangerous assignment requiring quick reflexes and steady nerves. Combat cameras carries weapons along with their other gear. Stacy loved the work. The military provided the stability, structure, and consistency that her childhood had lacked. To Iraq in 2003, she worked out of the tent city at Camp Sather, a U.S. military facility at Baghdad International Airport. Any, ugh, Anytime I see it, I automatically go to Bayap. She accompanied troops on patrols and on manhunts for former regime and Iraqi army officials, traversing Baghdad's dangerous streets in the neighborhoods known for suicide bombings. She was in '03. So I was a task force hunter in '03. I know there was a lot of us there in '03. It's just where she was and where I was. And that's good, Daniela. Kid making you eat everything you're going to have. You've had a kid before. All, th- all three of mine ate well while they were cooking. After a few months, she got her footing and began capturing images, not only to document what happened, but to explain how it felt. She looked to capture the impact of war on people for folks back home. The public provided my paycheck, she explained. They were relying on me to provide imagery of the war in which their country was involved. She began focusing more on the military as human beings, with all these things that happened in front of my camera that they are going to live with for the rest of their lives. Yes, watching pornography on their iPhones or joking around about silly things back home, chain smoking cigarettes, talking about shitting their pants or making fun of each other. The small, intimate details. She also documented the wounded and the Iraqi civilian dead. Let me go back. Yeah, it's Stacy Persall, Misty. Right, Bob? Let's see. She also documented the wounded and the Iraqi civilian dead, often capturing the images of bodies that had been carved up. Corpses, missing limbs, and heads without bodies. Seeing a mutilated body did not affect me. There wasn't life in it, and it was tragic that it happened. Please don't misunderstand what I am saying. We needed evidence that the enemy was mistreating local people. I was not emotionally affected by seeing it or photographing it, but seeing the wives of those killed and mutilated and the emotional impact of the war on them, that carries with me. I get that. Just before she completed her first deployment in '04, Stacy was riding in an unarmored Humvee that was wrecked in an IED blast. She was shaken up quite a bit, but instead insisted she was okay. When she got home, however, she experienced a cascade of symptoms: insomnia, and then the nightmares when she did fall asleep, constant fatigue, anxiety, not eating well. Some of it was undiagnosed PTSD. Some of it was moral injury that would never be diagnosed. Whatever it was, she felt she was falling apart. A Vietnam veteran, Vietnam veteran she met persuaded her to check in with the mental health unit at Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, her home station. I walked in and it was weird. There were people there for couples therapy. I went to the counter and said I needed a little help. I was not sleeping, and the person told me to see my primary care doctor and get sleeping pills. Yep. I said, really? So I can overdose and kill myself? That's a good way to get seen. Stacy turned and stomped out, but a counselor ran after her and suggested that she see the chaplain. I said, fine. I showed up at his office 15 minutes early. The office was locked and dark, and I waited until 15 minutes after my appointment, and he never showed up. Turned out he was golfing at a golfing tournament and totally blew me off. Eventually, she did get help from a VA operated vet center at Syracuse University, where she had won a spot in a military photojournalism course. The vet center therapist taught her to recognize those sights and sounds that would trigger her emotional reactions and how to deal with them. Driving past what looked like potential IED sites, for instance, on safe American streets, feeling more in control, she got married in 2006 to Andrew Dunaway, also a combat camera, and she immediately went off on the other military assignments. Back in Iraq on her second deployment in January '07, she felt more emotionally stable. If I felt stress, I could stop in the moment and stop my brain from getting away from me and understand that I'm in control and can change the outcome if I want to by presence of mind, she said. It was a brave attempt, but in Iraq, the killing had accelerated. President Bush had ordered a troop surge, and insurgents were stepping up the resistance. 25 Americans were killed in battle on a single day, January 20th. In all, 904 American troops would be killed in Iraqi freedom that year. The danger and stress rose to extreme levels and played out in some unexpected ways. When I asked Stacy about the time she pulled a gun on a child, she sighed and stared into her beer for a minute or two. At that point, at the height of the war, she said, many Iraqi men had been detained or killed or simply fled, often leaving wives and children to panhandle to find some other way to survive. And some of the kids were taken in by insurgents and paid to pickpocket U.S. troops or to dig a hole for an IED or carry a grenade into a crowd. Everywhere she went, kids would swarm around trying to get into her pockets, and she'd have a strong arm them away, and she began to feel utter disdain for the gangs of children. Repugnance is the word she used. Thank you, Dick Dickens. Appreciate the emails too, bud. One day, she was out photographing an operation to hunt down insurgents thought to be hiding in an apartment building. A painstaking and dangerous job of examining stairwells and rooms and shadows from floor to floor. We had encountered heavy fighting, and I hadn't slept in several days. No, Groovy, I was observing Remembrance Day. It was the 27th. I laid down with a headache and woke up and um, remembered the day. So yeah, and then Todd compares himself to Anne Frank on Remembrance Day. It just yeah. When I heard that, I was not happy. At one point, she came out of the building to one of the waiting vehicles. The driver was sitting there, the turret gunner was up there, and the door was open. It was sweltering hot, and a young kid came running at us full speed. Stacy yanked out her 9mm semi-automatic pistol, and the other soldiers swiveled with their weapons, and everyone froze. Turned out the kid only wanted a soccer ball, sometimes handed out by American soldiers. At that moment, even though none of us acted precipitously and fired our weapons, we took the time to make sure he wasn't a threat, and thank God nothing was negative. Nothing negative happened, but definitely made me look inward at myself. Like, what kind of woman am I? Women are made to make life, not take it. It was a moral thing. It definitely tested me, and it changed how I think of myself. Now, if I see a group of kids, I'm walking the other way. In an earlier conversation, Stacy had told me I have many reasons for not having children of my own. Huh, Todd? An interesting look on life after you've been in combat. Let's see. But in the long run, that incident has persuaded me not to. Stacy Pearsall was not physically hurt in the situation where she almost gunned down a child, nor did that incident contribute to her old PTSD. Instead, her injury was a moral one. And like other combat veterans I've known, she recognized the difference immediately. I feel differently in situations where a moral problem versus what triggers my PTSD. She had told me in our first conversation several weeks earlier, moral injury is more of a deep seated, any human being has difficulty justifying things that happen. And a lot of things happen that don't sit well with me. Some that I don't really want to get deeply into. I'm just not ready for that. All right, Lucy, rest well. But now she was ready and wanted me to know. Not long into her second deployment, she was assigned to cover the operations of a U.S. Army team working with Iraqi soldiers. American soldiers at the Ford operating base were clearly not eager to have her there. That kind of reception was always emotionally difficult because combat cameras bounced around from one unit to another, rarely having time to develop friendships. They came to rely on the instant camaraderie that is usually possible among men and women at war. Not this time. They were bastards, cold and unwelcoming, was the general feeling I got, and I loathed the idea of working with this team. She said, the prospect of entrusting her life to a group of men indifferent to her existence who excluded her from their intimate circle was daunting. But the unit's commanding officer, the captain, was a ray of sunshine in the dark clouds. He was always joking around, always had a smile, a family guy, married with kids. I loved him. Under orders, she worked with the unit for a few days, then was assigned elsewhere, and then came back and she came to value her time with the captain. She asked me not to use his name. They ran into each other occasionally for a couple of months, Stacy said. No, gosh, wow. It was really fast, actually, like maybe 6 weeks. One day, as the soldiers gathered for a mission briefing, she felt there was a really bad vibe. Kind of funky, but it was a critical mission. Everybody was hanging around with little rain clouds over their heads, acting all down. And the captain was there on his computer, Skyping home. And he was a little out of sorts and actually kind of abrupt with me, a little short in some ways. I was like, I hate this place. I was so mad and angry with him because he was supposed to be my breath of fresh air. The rest of the story came in short gasps between sobs and long silences as she worked to form the words. So my feelings were hurt, and we were riding in two separate vehicles. We were getting ready to leave, and I didn't say anything. So we left the fob, and we hit heavy resistance right away. Like we couldn't even get into the village, and mortar rounds were coming in, and small arms fire ricocheting off our vehicle. And mortar rounds were, homing in, and we were getting targeted a little closer and a little closer. And we were feeling the other pucker factor after a while. Then the guys in the other vehicle radioed over that the captain had been hit and he was down. And the medic was the driver in my vehicle. So we pulled up alongside their vehicle and opened the doors. There was gunfire and crossfire, but it was weird. In this moment, it was really quiet. And I had the medics medical case, and I'd passed that off to him. And we didn't know the extent of what severity his wounds were, but it was pretty bad. The commander made the decision to get back to the fob for a helicopter medevac. My vehicle pulled in first. We got out, and I got my camera in my hand, and I stood there debating what to do because the journalist in me has to document is happening because people need to know. And it doesn't matter that he is my friend. So I started taking pictures of the soldiers taking the body out of the vehicle. And I found it just repulsive physically to do it. Like the act of having the camera to my face and taking the pictures just made me feel less like a human. Like I had no feelings. I was a voyeur, that I had no morals, and I was judging myself harshly, thinking about what Uncle Sam was having me there to do in the first place. And I felt in this sense of obligation. And in that moment, the soldiers turned to me and called me every name in the book. They were screaming at me for doing what I did. I felt bad enough already. In the last picture I took, he was unconscious, but his eyes were open. I remember thinking, she stopped to try to compose herself after a while when she was able to go on. The helicopter landed, and I put my camera down, feeling disgusted with myself, feeling awful about what the soldiers thought of me. And I watched them put him in, and everybody went and took cover. But I just couldn't move. I felt cemented there. The rotor wash sprayed gravel everywhere. Rocks and sand just pelted me. I felt it was retribution, I guess, or my penance. Soldiers on the FOB had adopted a stray puppy they named Crockett. Stacy found Crockett and took him to a quiet, dark corner and curled up and held him and sobbed. And after a while, an officer found her and squatted down and apologized for the way the soldiers had yelled at her. And he said, I am sorry, but the mission is critical. And we really, really need to go back out there and get this image. And we need to leave shortly. But I understand if you don't want to go. Stacy said, I'm here for a reason and I have to work, so that's fine. And while they were walking out to the vehicles, Amanda came running with the news that Stacy's battle buddy, a young female combat camera, had been shot on a mission. Usually they had worked in pairs, but this time they were assigned different missions. And as the older of the two, Stacy felt responsible for watching over her. Shot. She's been shot. Shot means a lot of different things. The last shot I witnessed ended in death, she told the medic. It was hours before news came that her friend was wounded but alive. Carried the guilt from that for a very long time, Stacy said. But the death of the captain and her struggle to accommodate the competing demands of job and heart tore a hole in her soul, and that is unrepaired. She paused for a long time when I asked if she had come to accept that whatever she'd done would always feel half right and terribly wrong. I still don't know what to think of it, she said finally. I would have given my life for him, you know. If I could, I would have traded places with him. I felt devastated for the loss of my friend, and I feel like I didn't maybe uphold myself to the same standards as any other journalist would have in that situation. Don't make me look down See, interesting Bob Johnson. Stacy was medevac from Camp Warhorse in Iraq in April 2007 after the second time an ID blew her up in a vehicle. And eventually she came home to Charleston, where she underwent treatment for her neck injury that required twice weekly hospital visits under anesthesia, which meant she couldn't drive. With her husband still deployed in Iraq, members of her Air Force unit were assigned to drive her. That didn't work out well. There would be mornings they just wouldn't show up, and I had to take a taxi. And I couldn't help but think, you guys were really cool when I was able bodied and I could do everything you wanted me to do. And now that I'm broken, you don't want to have anything to do with me. In truth, she's probably more than a little irritable and acknowledged that I probably did myself a disservice by not letting them in on my emotional state. I was not ready to talk. One day, not long after, she was sitting in the waiting room at the Charleston VA, probably glowering at the other patients, mostly elderly men who she felt were staring at her. At the VA, guys were either mistaking her for a nurse, Miss, where's room 43B, or undressing her with their eyes. None of them felt saw her as a fellow veteran. This time, one guy in particular was staring at her. She could see him out of the corner of her eye, looking at her as a sex object, thinking more about her in unnatural ways. She couldn't decide whether to speak to him or get really angry. Speaking to him won out. Can I help you? She asked, summoning her most charming Southern Belle voice. He brightened, grinned. Soon he was relating his experiences in World War II, the fighting, the death, the camaraderie, the liberation of concentration camps. Stacy was enthralled, listening hard and thinking to herself, these are good stories. This is a valuable human being whom I almost didn't get to know because of my own prejudices. Like the soldiers whose portraits she had captured in Iraq, she thought this guy might not be around much longer. And that's how the Veterans Portrait Project was born, giving her renewed purpose as she travels the country, capturing images of veterans, young and old, men and women who had served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and countless places and missions in between. On the black and white images of their faces, the lines and creases of war, the depths of their eyes, the vulnerability of human beings. That's that for now. I do have one more thing. I want to. If I can find it again. So this is from the VA. This is the VA's thoughts on moral injury. This is by Dr. Sonia B. Norman and Dr. Shira Magwin. Shira Magwin, if you remember, is in this book. Who's done a lot of work on moral injury. So, what is moral injury? In traumatic or unusually stressful circumstances, people may perpetrate, aid, fail to prevent, or witness events that contradict deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. One, when someone does something that goes against their beliefs, this is often referred to as an act of commission. And when they fail to do something in line with their beliefs, that is often referred to as an act of omission. Individuals may also experience betrayal from leadership, others in position of power, or peers that can result in adverse outcomes. The moral injury is the distressing psychological, behavioral, social, and sometimes spiritual aftermath of exposure to such events. Moral injury can occur in response to acting or witnessing behaviors that go against an individual's values and moral beliefs. In order for moral injury to occur, the individuals must feel like a transgression occurred and that someone else crossed the line with respect to their moral beliefs. Guilt, shame, disgust, and anger are some of the hallmark reactions of moral injury. Guilt involves feeling distress or remorse regarding the moral injurious event. For example, I did something bad. Shame is when the belief about the event generalizes to the whole self. I'm a bad person because of what I did. Disgust may occur as a response to memories of an act of perpetration, and anger may occur in response to the loss or feeling betrayed. Another hallmark reaction to moral injury is an inability to self forgive and consequently engage in self sabotaging behaviors like feeling you don't deserve to succeed at work or relationships. Moral injury is also moral injury also typically has an impact on an individual's spirituality. For example, an individual with moral injury may have difficulty understanding how one's beliefs in relationship with a higher power can be true given the horrific event and the person the person experienced, leading to uncertainty about previously held spiritual beliefs. Moral injurious events. Most research to understand moral injury has been with military service members and veterans that, as the nature of war and combat creates situations where people may have the experience that contradict the values they live by in civilian life. Examples of potentially morally injurious events in the context of war include killing or harming others. When officers have to make decisions that affect the survival of others, when medics are not able to care for all who are harmed, freezing or failing to perform a duty during a dangerous or traumatic event, for example, falling asleep on patrol, failing to report an event that violates rules or ethics, engaging in or witnessing acts of disproportionate violence, and feeling uplifting or exhilaration while causing harm or killing others. Even even though most research has been with service members and veterans, moral injury can occur in the context of many types of traumatic events. Studies have shown moral injury among law enforcement officers and civilians experiencing community violence. Moral injury among healthcare workers may occur if they have been able to save a patient's life, but were not able to do so. In the time of healthcare crisis, healthcare workers may witness what they perceive to be unjustifiable or unfair acts or policies that may lead to a sense of betrayal. They also may feel guilty about surviving when others are dying or infected people with whom they come in contact. So you can read more about moral injury and healthcare workers. The link didn't say for some reason, probably by my lack of technology. Moral injury and PTSD. There's a great deal of overlap between moral injury and post traumatic stress disorder. Both begin with an event that is often life threatening or harmful to self or others. Guilt or shame are core features of moral injury and are also symptoms of PTSD. The betrayal and loss of trust that could be experienced with moral injury are also common features of PTSD. For example, someone who is assaulted by a loved one may feel betrayed and have difficulty trusting others, whether or not they also suffered moral injury or PTSD. In regard to the differences between the two, PTSD includes additional symptoms such as hyperarousal that are not central to moral injury. Although the core features of moral injury overlap in symptoms and common features of PTSD, it is possible to have moral injury and not meet the criteria for PTSD. So that a lot of the WebMD diagnoses and stuff like that, people may think they have PTSD, uh, but it could be just moral injury, could be moral injury mixed with PTSD, could be traumatic brain injury. So we have to be careful. There's these fine lines that intersect so well. Let's see. In addition, distress from moral injury, injurious events. Those websites are helpful while helping themselves to your data. Absolutely, Mrs. Metcalf. Um, but Gen, Gen Y and Gen Zers, and unfortunately Boomers love doing that. Boston, hello, governor. Let's see. For example, one study found that perpetration based events where someone perpetrated an act outside of one's values, were associated with more re experiencing guilt and self blame than were life threatening traumatic events. Reporting perpetration is also associated with greater suicidal ideation, even after adjusting for PTSD, depression, and substance abuse. Exposure to moral injurious events is associated with both suicidal ideation as well as suicide attempts. Having moral injury in addition to PTSD is associated with greater PTSD and depression symptom severity and greater likelihood of suicidal intent and behaviors. Studies have evaluated core features of moral injury, like the functional impairment. Potentially, more injurious events are also prevalent in those with probable PTSD and depression. Exposure to potentially moral injurious experiences also been associated with substance use disorders. Um, I will say that the PTSD uh, mixed with moral injury, knowing what I know now, and seeking out uh, the next thing to uh, provide that rush. Um, it is a real thing. I I I did it for a whole lot of years. So um I just from experience that's a fact for me anyway. Let's see, where are we? Um, assessing moral injury. When assessing moral injury, it is important to identify exposure to a potentially moral injurious event, PMI, and assess moral injury symptoms linked to this PMI, as opposed to asking about moral injury symptoms in general. Psychometric studies have been published for two measures of moral injury assessing PMIs and associated moral injury symptoms. The moral outcome scale, MIOS 20, that's note 23, has been validated with veterans and acute care nurses. The MIOS has a two-factor structure capturing shame and trust. The moral injury and distress scale, MIDS, is a comprehensive measure that links PMIs to subjective distress and moral injury symptoms. Hey, Mr. Reekin. I mean, yeah, I think we're getting to the clinical terms of that. Yes. Let's see. Psychometric properties across three populations of high risk for moral injury, including veterans, healthcare workers, and res- responders. Bob, 100%. It just nothing accounts for it. It queries respondents about a comprehensive set of emotional, cognitive, behavioral, social, and spiritual problems that load onto an unidimensional, some core, indicative, and increasingly severe moral injury. A cutoff has been established that differentiates those with moral distress from those with highly distressing and impairing moral injury. Earlier, moral injury research predominantly focused on exploring the link between PMIs. Hey, Woodrow, my opinion in general might not be the best approach to identify this. Three symptoms can be cumulative and there might be latency period. Very difficult to pinpoint. Yeah. But I mean, when you're talking about general populations, right? And you're trying to get your paper published and across, you got to say in general you know, general for general populations. And it's these three general populations. But when you if you if you heard uh that last chapter in what have we done, um the combat camera, Stacy, she not only had moral injury, she had PTSD, she had TBI, back fractures, probably other injuries from IED blast. Um, so some focus on reactions common to moral injury, such as guilt, shame, and betrayal. Examples of these assessments include the 20-item moral injury questionnaire, which assesses exposure and frequency of events service members may experience in war. A modified version also includes common reactions such as guilt, shame, difficulty forgiving self and others, and withdrawal. The 9-item moral injury event scale, MICE, ask about war related events that include perpetration by self and by others and betrayal. The 17-item expression of moral injury scale ask about the experience of self and others directed moral emotions related to military experiences. Jesus. My second trip to Iraq, I was out of the Marines the next month. A huge adjustment. Bob, yeah, I mean, a lot of the Marines at the beginning of this book discuss the same thing. When you're out, they just plop plop you back in, and we talked about the biblical moral cleansing after war, the moral cleansing during war by the Greeks, Romans, and stuff like that. There should be a step down, like you say, Mrs. Metcalf. I mean, it's a like Israel does it, right? They bring you back into society, and they bring you back in and celebrate you, and um, you're welcome back into society, and you're given a spot in society where, hey Chino, and you're given a place to I don't want to say you're given a place to reintegrate, and you're all you're always part of society, the greater society. I was trying to avoid the giving you a place to come term when I'm trying to be serious. Treating moral injury. It can be difficult for patients to share moral injurious events because of the feelings of guilt and shame associated with them. Therapy may be the first time patients share the story, so they may be concerned about a therapist's reactions. They may be wonder they may wonder, am I being judged? Is my therapist disgusted with me? Is this too much for my therapist to handle? I have made my therapist bawl, cry. It is important for therapists to convey an accepting, non judgmental, empathetic stance. It is also important for therapists to stay alert of their own presumptions about perpetration, morals, values, and spirituality. Moral injury may lead patients to believe that they do not deserve to feel better, which could negatively affect how much patients engage in and comply with treatment. I will not comply. Self sabotaging behavior in therapy or other facets of life, such as work or relationships, may be clues to a moral injury that has not yet been disclosed. Thus, therapists should assess for such beliefs and address them in therapy. Bob, yeah, that I mean that, and look at how many successful people were GI Bill recipients because it was encouraged. It was not just something they said, here, it's yours. Uh, go do it, right? Um, hey, Misty, welcome back. Yeah, we're just going over a moral injury paper. Uh, I'm glad people stuck it around for the boring clinical part of this, but this is an important part of it too. So, surprisingly, little is known about whether PTSD treatment reduces moral injury, likely because until recently, there have not been assessments appropriate for measuring change in moral injury. Researchers have hypothesized that trauma focused PTSD treatments, such as prolonged exposure, gross PE, and cognitive processing therapy, CPT, can be effective for patients with moral injury. In PE, patients have opportunity for emotional processing and to gather context that helps them make sense of the trauma through in, imaginal and in vivo exposure. Well, they also World War II guys just kind of took all of it and stuffed it all down, and a lot of them, like the Vietnam, Korea guys, did decide to drink. Let's see. CPT is designed to help patients work through beliefs that generally underlie guilt, shame, and betrayal, such as the patient should have done something differently during the trauma. CPT also addresses beliefs about the self, such as I am unforgivable, and beliefs around betrayal and trust. Thus, both treatments can target the core components of moral injury. Yes, thank you, Nomad. Some studies have shown that trauma focused PTSD treatments, such as PE and CPT, effectively reduce trauma related guilt and shame. Although one study found that trauma related guilt was likely to endure following PE and CPT, possible explanation for the discrepant findings regarding guilt is that traumatic events other than those that cause guilt and moral injury may have been the focus of treatment. It is common for people with PTSD to have experienced more than one traumatic event in their lifetime. So it is possible that the traumatic events processed in therapy were not the ones involved in trauma related guilt. It is also common for patients. What's up, Wyatt? I'll see. It's also common for patients to not share their worst traumatic event for fear of being judged. Subsequently, testing the waters with another event. In this case, a patient may not have had the opportunity to gather corrective information that could help alleviate their concerns, such as self forgiveness. About the same, Wyatt, about the same. There's also evidence that some individuals may need additional treatments to address moral injury, specific concerns, self forgiveness that may require more honed and specialized treatment. Is that to me, Mr. Metcalf? There are also treatments under investigation that specifically target moral injury or its core components. Acceptance and commitment therapy, adapted for moral values, adaptive disclosures is a 12-session individual treatment that helps patients process moral injury through imagery dialogue with a compassionate moral authority by apportioning blame, making amends, and in some versions, self compassion and mindfulness meditations. The impact of killing intervention is a 10-session individual therapy that helps patients explore the functional impact of not forgiving oneself, develop a forgiveness plan, including letter writing to the individuals killed, and helps patients develop an amends plan to honor the values that were violated in the act of killing. It is intended to be phased treatment delivered after PTSD treatment. Let's see. The moral injury group is a 12-session group intervention that is co delivered by a chaplain and psychologist. includes a ceremony where participation share testimonies of their moral injury with the public. So this is kind of like the chaplain in was he in Iraq? Yeah, he was in Iraq at one of the palaces, and they where they took all their injury, 1/6, took out everything and put it in the bowl, and they burn them. Trauma informed guilt reduction therapy is a 6 session individual therapy that patients identify and evaluate beliefs such as hindsight bias and responsibility that contribute to guilt and shame. Identifying important values, including those that were violated during the trauma, and make a plan to live in line with those values going forward. Building spiritual strength is an 8 session group therapy that can be led by a chaplain and addresses concerns about relationship with a higher power, power as well as challenges with forgiveness. Each of these novel treatments has trials in progress with the service members or veterans that will inform whether they are effective in reducing moral injury. If these treatments are effective, it will be important to understand how they compare to PTSD treatments. In reducing PTSD and moral injury among patients who have both and who may benefit most from which treatment, it is also will be critically important to learn about moral injury from traumatic events other than war. Conclusion. Moral injury can occur in reaction to a traumatic event in which deeply held. All right, Mrs. Metcalf. Moral values are violated. The resulting distress may lead to PTSD, depression, or other disorders in which feelings such as guilt, shame, betrayal, and anger are predominant. Although these feelings may occur in the absence of a formal disorder, although most research has been conducted has focused on military veterans, moral injury can occur outside of the military, obviously. The attention that moral injury has received over the past decade shows that the concept resonates with individuals that who have experienced a moral injurious event, as well as with clinicians and researchers. A biopsychosocial spiritual model has been recommended as a framework for obtaining knowledge needed in order to understand and address moral injury in treatment. And here is all of the references. Look, pod references. I will put this up on my community post. That way, y'all have access to it. Um, Wyatt. I mean, Todd blames everybody for everything. I mean, he compared himself to Anne Frank last night, for goodness sake. So there that is. Let me go. Let me clear my throat. Let me through this shit. Oh, okay. So Shiz is on at 8:40 tonight. Tonight, tonight. I don't know. Wyatt, are you on my Discord? Does anybody need my Discord link? Hey, Linda P. Who's a good girl? Hazel. Such a good girl. So, anybody have any questions, comments, gripes? Um, Sorry I missed last night. I know Jeff was telling me some of the things that were going on. So I'll get back into the regular swing. Um, Yesterday just turned out to be a kind of a depressing kind of a day or evening. I was so freaking. I felt so. I'll tell you, and I think I put it up on my community on a community post that I spent all day just seething about the toddler and watching his stuff and recording some things, but I and I was like, why am I worrying about somebody that is so insignificant? But people didn't worry about the little corporal from Austria either because he was so insignificant and his rhetoric was insignificant until it wasn't, right? Um he wants to shut me down because I don't know why. Um so I'm gonna keep calling him out on his bullshit. Um he wants to accuse me of reporting him when he's the one striking me. So um I've made it so he's just gonna have to file a lawsuit if he wants me to pull that one video down. Um, so I wish him luck. Uh, Anybody questions, comments? We'll see everybody at got to do jazz. Got to do. There you go, Mr. Rican. It's all better now. Um, piling trauma on top of trauma, moral injury on top of moral injury. I think for us veterans who are getting PTSD care, I know I try to talk about my complex PTSD with them, and they're like, "No, we're only focused on your strictly your combat PTSD," and I'm like, "Well, uh, no, Woodrow. In fact, Celine, my white cat, was laying on top of my weapon pile back there. I don't know where she is now. My black cat's laying over there, but I'm not about to go try to get him. He gets violent when he wants his attention. He gets his attention, and then he's a black cat. He does what he wants, but my white cat's more like a dog. So so I'm sure they'll make an appearance if we do a post shiz show or a pre shiz show. Let's see what Hefe and El Scotto are doing. So, all right, you guys, I will leave it here. Almost an hour and a half. Not bad. So, y'all be good. I will see y'all on the flip side.